Welcome and thank you for joining our Impact SMA UK virtual event. My name is Louis. I have SMA Type 2, and this event is all about the charity and where we've come from and what kind of impact we've had on the world of SMA thus far. So today I'm joined by four wonderful guests. Mark Dearlove, the Chair of Trustees, Angela Smith-Morgan, our CEO, Professor Ros Quinlivan, Portia Thorman, our Advocacy Lead here at the charity as well. I think if I can come to you first, Mark, if you can just tell us a little bit more about the charity, where we started and what we've been up to.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Louis. Hopefully you can see a timeline on your screen, and that timeline shows details of many of the important landmarks and milestones during the course of our charity's history. And during tonight's event, we will touch on many of those. I also know that some of you on tonight's call will be very familiar with the story of the charity, but I would like to quickly recap it, if I may. In 1985, following the death of her daughter, Jennifer, aged 7, from SMA Type 1, Anita Macaulay founded the Jennifer Trust. And at the time, SMA was basically unknown, and Anita wanted to offer support and hope to other families affected by SMA. And her aim was to make sure that no one had a similar experience to her. In 2003, the SMA Trust was founded by two SMA families, the Knights and the Pickerings, to help find therapies and treatments for SMA. And over the next few years, a huge amount of research and development went into helping discover therapies and treatments. And having achieved much of those goals, it was agreed that the SMA community would best be served by merging those two charities. And in 2018, SMA UK was established. And many of you tonight have been part of that journey. 37 years from the founding of the Jennifer Trust, almost 20 years from the founding of the SMA Trust. And now we're coming up to almost 5 years with SMA UK. These charities have really made a very significant impact on the SMA community. The purpose of tonight's virtual event is to tell you where we are now, to highlight our goals and also some of our challenges that we have for the future. And for our donors and supporters who perhaps are not necessarily involved with the SMA community every day, I really want to impress upon you that the contributions that you've made over the years have had a very, very significant and a very, very material effect on the SMA community. And with that, Louis, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think for anyone to know where you're going, you need to know where you come from. And thank you for that. Portia, if I can come to you, as an advocacy lead, it would be really great to know how SMA UK has supported you and your family.
So, hi everyone, nice to be here. As well as being advocacy lead at SMA UK, I'm also a mum of a little boy who was diagnosed with SMA Type 1 back in March 2017 when he was just 4 months old. We were actually, fortunately, one of the first of a new generation for the SMA UK outreach team, as we were able to access treatment. Since their introduction in 2006, the outreach team have been visiting families like mine all over the country. And back then, it was primarily as a palliative support service. They supported families who were coming to terms with what was then a terminal diagnosis and being there through that grieving process. And for all families living with all types of SMA, they did, and they still do, provide very individualized support for all sorts of challenges that come with the diagnosis and living with a disability. So for me, at that time, SMA UK's website was really the only place, given it's such a rare disease, it was the only place on the internet that I could find information that was reliable and up to date. I'd never heard of SMA before. And that was really important because everything else I read was so very, very scary. And it was really, really reassuring to see that PIF tick on the website. That means that all the information SMA UK have is accredited by the Patient Information Forum, which is like a UK-wide quality mark for health information. And it shows that all the information has been through a really rigorous and really thorough assessment process. And I know that my colleagues who work on the information team, they feel great trepidation. It's like the Ofsted for them when the PIF tick assessment comes through, and they work really hard to make sure all their information is correct and up to date. So it was through that website that I stumbled across a toy pack offer. So for newly diagnosed families, SMA UK will send them this beautiful collection of multi-sensory toys that are just perfect for a baby living with the limitations that SMA brings. So with the support of the fundraisers, it's still a really successful initiative today. I know lots of families that really appreciated their toy pack. Ours came at a really hard time in between 2 PICU admissions. Just to have that at home waiting for us when we got back, it really lifted my spirits. It's just the little things that really, really helped. So since that initial introduction, nearly 6 years ago now, SMA UK have supported me. Back then, with regular check-ins, we had many long and scary intensive care admissions in my son's first 2 years. And they were always at the end of the phone. They would always check in with an email. And as time went on, they were there for anything from house adaptations to form filling. As a mum of a disabled child, there are many, many, many forms that you have to fill in for benefits and for help. And of course, for treatment options, for advice about treatment. So treatment for us at that time, it really was an unknown. It was a big decision. It wasn't readily available on the NHS yet. Clinicians really only had data from trials in America. So SMA UK Outreach really supported me in that decision. So my son accessed Spinraza through what's called an Expanded Access Program, or an EAP. I have learned a lot of acronyms in this job. I have a little dictionary of acronyms. So back then I had no idea how much work SMA UK had done in the background to hasten access to treatments. They work really closely with NICE, which is the body that sort of recommend which drugs they think the NHS should take on. And the specialist clinicians, they give the patient perspective and really stress the life-changing impact treatments could have. SMA UK really ensured, with the help of alliances and stakeholders, working together, they ensured that we got access as soon as possible to Spinraza. And given the severity of my son's condition, speed really was the essence. Like if it had been 1 month, 2 months down the line, my son wouldn't be here today. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that. I think I can really relate to that because being born in South Africa, I never had access to organizations like SMA UK who could give us information. We kind of had to go on the flow of the doctors and try and research our own international knowledge, and applying that to South Africa is never easy. I mean, you've already touched on the support and some of the treatments, but why would you say it's important for SMA UK to have accurate information on treatments and life living with SMA?
Well, I think for SMA, the 3 treatments came along really, really quickly. So they went from no treatments at all, and then suddenly there were 3 of them that have come along on a managed access agreement, another acronym for you, an MAA. So the managed access agreement is different to the Expanded Access Programme, because that one basically allowed access to a drug that was still in the trial phase on a compassionate basis, in order to save a life, basically. So only the real life-threatening cases, like my son's, could get accessed on the EAP. Now, the Managed Access Agreement, the MAA, is a very structured agreement between the pharmaceutical company and NICE, which stands for the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. And that's to widen access while still collecting data to ensure the drug is both effective and value for money for the NHS. Because with the problem that pharmaceutical companies have with rare diseases is their patient population isn't big enough to really collect the amount of data they need to prove that it's A, effective, and B, it's going to be value for money. So the MAA allows more patients to access the drug and allows them to collect more data. So Spinraza was the first MAA to launch, and that was in July 2019, closely followed by Zolgensma in March 2021, and then chasing its tail, Risdiplam, in November 2021. So this is an enormous amount of information for anybody to process, because each MAA has its own access criteria, different methods for collecting all this important data, different access criteria for each drug, like what weight you have to be under, what age you have to be under, your spinal health. There's so many variables for everything that it's really difficult for families and adults and patients, all the patients, to get their head around it. So SMA UK worked really, really hard during that time to make sure that all their information was up to date, and they would continually review it, because all the access criteria would change as well as time goes on. Just within a year, they would open it up to a different sort of demographic of people. So all this information changing really quickly. SMA UK was really the only place people could go to know what they're eligible for, when they'll be eligible for it, how they can get it, where they can get it, and who to contact. All that really, really super important information, life-changing information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think since I've been in the UK, even before I joined as an employee of SMA UK, the outreach team really helped me build a solid foundation on knowledge and what things I can look out for. So as a community member myself, I'm very grateful for the accurate information that we can provide. In terms of your advocacy lead role, what are your ambitions? What's the future looking like?
Okay, so I think to talk about my ambitions, I need to explain how I'm going to get there. So 5 years on from diagnosis, my son is now in year 1 at mainstream school, drives a little power chair around like a whiz. And I found myself with the time to be advocacy lead at SMA UK. So I'm very privileged to be working with the small but extremely dedicated team here. And my job is to raise awareness of SMA and the issues that affect the community as a whole. So not so much the individualized support that the outreach team provide, but those bigger issues. So I respond to government consultations if the issues directly affect the SMA community. For example, the new Innovative Medicines Fund, the integrated care systems, or the disability strategy. I will give the government the patient perspective from the SMA's point of view. I listen to the community when we've got some great networks, and by working with the outreach team to find out which issues are coming up more often than others and which need our focus. For example, at the moment, the crisis in care is a big one, the cost of living, access to inclusive mainstream education. And then some of these more pan-disability issues, I work with, we've got lots of partner charities. So I work with our alliances like MD UK really closely, the Disabled Children's Partnership, Genetic Alliance, just to name a few. We also, with the advent of treatments, we work closely with pharmaceutical companies. There's many more sort of combination therapies in the pipeline, which could continue to improve health outcomes for everyone living with SMA. So we are consulted as about details such as trial design, outcome measures, patient population. And we're always happy to put questions from our community to the right people and see if we can find an answer for them. I'm really proud to represent SMA UK on the SMA Europe Treatment Committee. It's a really exciting group of people. It unites patient representative groups like ours in the UK, but with them from across Europe. So we have one aim, which is to improve access to treatment and therapies across Europe, sharing good practice, working with pharmaceutical companies, just to advocate for really effective and equitable treatments across Europe. Those meetings are always really exciting.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you sharing that. And as a community member and a colleague, I look forward to seeing that come to pass. So I think we've touched on the history. We've spoken about support, and you mentioned the word treatment quite a lot. So I think that's a great opportunity to come to you, Professor Ros. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just mention that we've heard how hard SMA UK have contributed towards the future and towards research. Can you tell us a little bit more about how this has impacted people with SMA? Sorry, Professor, you're on mute.
Yes, thank you for that, Louis.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Louis. And also thank you to Portia for really setting the scene in terms of how things have changed for people and families living with SMA. I started as a consultant in 1995, the same year that the SMN1 gene was discovered. And all those years ago, I would never have imagined that we would be where we are today with 3 treatments licensed by the NHS, by NICE and the NHS through, as Portia has said, a managed access program. And I'm going to talk about some of the trials and some of the evidence behind these treatments. So if we could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So the first treatment, as you heard, to be licensed was nusinersen. We now call it Spinraza. And as you can see, there have been quite a few clinical trials. The ones that people will have heard of are Nurture, Embrace, Cherish, and Endear. These are the larger phase 2 and phase 3 studies. And when clinical trials are set up, the phase 1 studies are really looking at safety. So that's usually just giving a single dose to make sure it's safe. And then gradually there will be multiple dosings to check the right dose and whether repeated doses are safe. So the first studies are very much about safety. And then the later studies are still about safety, but they're also about efficacy, showing whether or not this new treatment has a benefit. So next slide, please. And as you can see, there have been a number of publications now relating to the benefit for Spinraza. Trials have included infants with type 1 SMA, both before they develop symptoms and when they're symptomatic, and then also type 2 SMA, and then a smaller, just one single trial with a smaller number of patients for type 3 SMA. And these trials were conducted in patients up to the age of 18. So there are no adult studies, although Biogen and the NHS will be acquiring, as you've heard, real life data in adult patients. But Spinraza has proven to be very successful treatment for many people with SMA. And you can see here from this study, this was published in The Lancet. This was the phase 2b study of nusinersen in type 1 SMA. And you can see the fixed line here is the natural history control patients. And then the dotted lines on the left, the zigzaggy lines are the motor scores of babies treated with SMA, and you can see that they are very much better than natural history controls. And likewise, on the right, sorry, can you go back a bit? On the right, the nusinersen-treated patients who require ventilation are the red bar, and you can see that very few patients compared to the natural history controls, which are blue, go on to require ventilation. So next slide, please. So this was a huge benefit. And then along came risdiplam, or Evrysdi. So nusinersen is given through an injection in the base of the spine. Risdiplam is given by mouth. So risdiplam is given every day. Nusinersen is given in a pulsed way every 4 months after loading doses. There are currently 4 trials for risdiplam. Can you go back one, please? Thank you. Rainbow Fish is for pre-symptomatic babies. And then there is a trial Firefish for type 1, Sunfish for type 2 or 3, and then Jewelfish for types 1, 2, and 3. So next slide, thank you. And these trials have not yet been published in a journal, but they have been presented at conferences, particularly for the type 1 babies. And so because it's not been in a publication in a journal, I've downloaded this from the Roche website, and this is the CHOP-INTEND scores, individual plots again for babies treated with risdiplam, and you can see there is a tendency to improvement. Next slide. Thank you. And then finally, Zolgensma, which is a form of gene therapy. This is where the gene is attached to a virus called AAV9, and this virus carries, if you like, a correct type SMA1 gene into the cells of a baby that you infect with the virus. And again, there have been a number of trials. These are sponsored by Novartis, and you will have heard of SPRINT, START, STRIVE, and SPRINT. And there's also a trial now for pre-symptomatic babies as well. Next slide. And again, this has been taken from the Novartis website. But again, if you compare the natural history controls, which are the black dotted lines at the bottom, with treated babies, this is the CHOP-INTEND score, which is a motor score, and you can see really quite marked improvement in treated babies compared with untreated babies. Next slide, please. Thank you.
So, I mean, this is really great stuff, and even though some of it might be very technical, I think it's really great to see the comparison between with and without. Can I ask you to maybe elaborate a little bit more, Professor Ros, on the different treatments, so some of us can have a better understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, and specifically, I thought, Lou, it might be worth talking about the specific challenges that we have for these treatments and the challenges that we face as clinicians now in the NHS, because these drugs have gone from the research element, if you like, clinical trials, to now being delivered by the NHS. So if we look at Spinraza, as we've heard, it's funded by a managed access program. And so what a managed access program means is that the NHS will fund it for a limited period of time while further data are being collected. And these data include really quite detailed assessments, usually made by a physiotherapist. And those assessments will be uploaded with patient consent onto a national database called SMA Reach. And SMA UK has been very involved in all stages, as Portia has said, of getting these drugs licensed and made available for patients. And SMA UK has also been very involved in the SMA Reach network. But, you know, these assessments can take 1 to 2 hours, so they're really quite intensive. So the NHS has actually funded the delivery of Spinraza, which is quite complicated because it has to be given through an injection in the base of the spine. It requires a hospital admission. For individuals like the slide I have here, which is somebody who's had spinal fusion, and also for older patients and particularly adult patients, we tend to go for X-ray imaging to make sure we get the needle into the right place, because technically it can be very difficult. So that requires setting up a session with our radiologists. In our centre, we use something called fluoroscopy. So that's image-guided injection. And if that fails, we then go to CT-guided injections. And some centres are now also using ultrasound to guide the injections. It can still be difficult, though, to get access for some people. And so some centres are now looking at putting in what we call a port, which is a device that will allow you to inject from outside the spinal canal. But this is off licence, and there are potential risks associated with this. So it's always about balancing risk versus benefit. I think Spinraza is really well tolerated by all the people we've seen who've had it. There is a potential for getting headaches after a lumbar puncture. There have been a few very rare reports of hydrocephalus, and we've had one patient who developed a rash, so we've had to stop Spinraza in that particular patient. Next slide, please. Risdiplam also, although it's an oral drug, that brings also specific challenges to us as clinicians in the NHS, because again, this is a managed access agreement, so we have to collect data, and these are almost the same assessments that we need to do for Spinraza. So they take 1 to 2 hours every 6 months. But unlike Spinraza, the NHS is not funding the prescription assessment or data collection aspect of this project. And so in order to deliver it, we have to recruit additional staff. And I have to say a huge thank you to Roche here, because they have funded for 1 year a physiotherapist to help us to do this. But Spinraza is well tolerated. There have been some adverse effects reported, such as skin rashes and tummy upsets, but generally it's very well reported, very well tolerated. For anyone who is starting Spinraza, there is a theoretical risk that it may reduce male fertility. And this is based on animal studies. And for all of these drugs, because they're very new, we recommend that any patient taking them uses contraception, because we don't know what the risk is for an unborn fetus if you're taking these drugs. Next slide. Zolgensma also has specific challenges. There are 4 national centres appointed to deliver treatment. These are in Bristol, London, Manchester and Sheffield. Again, this requires a hospital admission. And as you heard from Portia, in a baby with type 1 SMA, for all of these treatments, you've got to really start as soon as possible. But before you can start, you have to confirm the diagnosis with a genetic test. And also for babies, we have to make sure they don't already have antibodies to the virus that is carrying the corrected gene. For babies who have this treatment, it's really important that there is a multidisciplinary team around that baby. And this includes other specialists. So as well as the
Professor, I think we might have lost you there.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I think it was our internet. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I was just talking about the adverse effects, and the important one with Zolgensma is the liver, effect on the liver. And babies need to be treated with steroids for several months after starting treatment. And it may also affect the platelet count. So these need to be monitored very regularly. And there are very rare reports of quite severe reactions. So these can be very serious. Next slide, please. So the challenges, so it's really, really exciting that we have all these treatments. And I would say huge thank you to SMA UK for their involvement in delivering these treatments. But I would say for all of them, the earlier we can get these treatments in, the better, and ideally before any symptoms occur. And for those patients who are having treatment, it's still really important that we maintain the international standards of care for SMA. In other words, we look at all the other aspects of managing someone with SMA. our adult centres have really had a lot of struggles trying to deliver these drugs. There were many people with SMA not attending a special centre at all. So we've had a lot of new referrals. And for those people, we've had no genetic results available. So we've had to retest genetics. And the managed access agreement contract was offered by NHS England to the adult centres in November 2019. And in order to establish a service, we had to write business cases, we had to train and accredit staff because the NHS has very strict guidelines on intrathecal injections. We had to appoint new staff and train them, and we had to make hospital beds available. But of course, we were hit very severely by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that kind of delayed everything. But I think things are now moving forward very rapidly, and that's been a huge help for centres. And I've already mentioned the challenges for risdiplam, which is funding, but all of these drugs, for particularly risdiplam and Spinraza, will have stopping rules. So there is a national oversight committee just reviewing data. And if these treatments have no effect, then there has to be a discussion about whether they should be continued. Also, there's never been a direct comparison between any of these three treatments. So they all have benefit, but we don't know the risk versus benefit effect for each specific treatment. And hopefully actually collecting this real world data through the managed access programs will help to answer those questions.
Thank you, Professor. I think that was very informative, and I want to say personally thank you for all the hard work that everyone has put into the background. As someone who is on risdiplam, it's just really amazing. So thank you for that.
And thanks, Louis. And you mentioned that you're taking risdiplam, and how does that feel to you when you're actually taking it?
Well, I mean, it's great to be part of the Strawberry Daiquiri Club, as some of the other SMAs call it. And I think for me, I really try my best to not have expectations. So to see the slight improvements in my grip and in my jaw control is really given me a lot of hope and kind of filled my soul with joy. So I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
That's really encouraging. Thanks, Louis.
I mean, now that we've spoken about treatment, I think it would be a great time to come back to you, Mark. And if I could ask you to maybe elaborate on COVID. I think COVID has had a devastating effect on the world, and we're slowly but surely starting to adapt to it. But what kind of an impact has it had on the charity?
Well, Louis, as I think you know, I became chair of SMA UK on the 1st of March 2020, just days before the COVID pandemic really hit the headlines. And it wasn't really what I was expecting, what I signed up for. But joking aside, the pandemic has had a very significant impact on our community. Many people were forced to shield. There was a huge amount of fear and uncertainty about the effect and impact of COVID. And of course, large parts of our community that were undergoing treatments had challenges in terms of accessing them by the NHS. And also within the charity, we had to make some very difficult decisions. We furloughed a number of our brilliant team, which obviously impacted our ability to provide services. Our outreach workers had to stop face-to-face meetings, and we cancelled a number of community-wide events. And of course, it had an impact on our fundraising, as many of the fundraising activities that we depend upon were all cancelled. But having said that, there were some interesting things and beneficial things that came out of that period of time. Firstly, the support from our donor community was unwavering. And we really are incredibly grateful for your support through that time. Secondly, we all realized that we could work from home. And that has had an impact on our hiring as a charity. We now have colleagues based in other parts of the UK. And as a consequence, we have access to a pool of talent across the country. Thirdly, we expanded our services and reached digitally. We've produced podcasts, set up webinars, arranged Zooms and team meetings in order for our community to remain connected and up to date. And finally, remote working has meant that our board meetings have become much more accessible. And I'm really pleased to say that our board of trustees, which we expanded in the last couple of years, hails from across the UK, the West Country, the home counties, Manchester, London, the Midlands, and Scotland. And this national representation can only be a good thing for us.
Absolutely. I think whilst the pandemic had a lot of negative impact, there's a lot of positive that has come to that in conjunction with technology. So yeah, absolutely. Angela, if I could come to you, as a CEO, what are your current primary activities for the charity, and in what direction would you like to take SMA UK? On mute.
Thanks very much, Louis, and everyone. Well, absolutely. As you've heard from colleagues, the recent years have seen huge scientific progress for SMA, and we have the 3 treatments. And whilst this is incredibly positive, on a day-to-day level, this has been a very anxious time for our community. We have tried to be alongside them and actively advocating for some of the changes they need in the wider care system. Our support and outreach workers have seen higher than ever demand for our services. So we're proud of our close relationships with key players such as the NHS, the pharma companies, and we have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure the best possible service and sharing of the most up-to-date information with the SMA community. But as I say, the developments, which are hugely welcomed, also bring fresh challenges for people impacted by SMA. The effect of treatments still varies. And as we know, care services have never been under such pressure. So whilst the direction of travel is definitely optimistic, the day-to-day for our community and for our charity continues to bring new challenges and new ground to navigate.
Absolutely. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what are some of the immediate goals that you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. Yeah, again, we've seen great progress in the provision of drug treatments, and we are proud of our role in that. But SMA are pushing even harder right now to ensure that the future keeps improving, and we have a huge agenda for the future. It's not always visible, but we work with our stakeholders to push forward the whole agenda for SMA, be that in treatments or care or other needs. So, for example, top of my list right now is to work with the NHS clinicians, the SMA Reach Network and partners on revising and reworking the agreed standards of care for SMA. We all know there's a crisis right now in the care sector, and we hear a lot about the pressure the NHS is under. But added to the general difficulty is accessing care services. There are huge disparities across different geographies, and it's simply unfair. So SMA UK had a big role in creating the current standards of care, but they now date from pre-treatments. And so we want to now agree, we want the experts to agree optimum care pathways for each individual living with SMA, which really is quite a huge undertaking. And again, we'll need to raise the money to employ a specialised project manager to work on this. So we're at the really early stages of this, but we will make sure it happens. It's absolutely vital that it happens. And secondly, I think I need to talk about newborn screening. Newborn screening for SMA, we are founder members of the UK Newborn Screening Alliance alongside MD UK and Professor Laurent Servet of the University of Oxford, who has this year started the first UK pilot in the Thames Valley area. SMA UK have employed a project manager to pull together all the various strands of evidence which the UK Newborn Screening Committee will need in order to consider the case when we're able to put it forward. Now that Zolgensma is available, many other countries have already implemented newborn screening, most of the US, Germany, several European countries. And we really want to keep up the pressure on behalf of all UK families to gain the approval here so that babies can be treated as early as possible before symptoms are visible.
Thank you. And as a community member who's now become a staff member, I truly understand how ambitious the charity is and what we're trying to achieve. So can you tell me what the future, what lies on the horizon for us as a charity?
Yeah, because I see an important part of our role is to push the boundaries for SMA, meaning we need to look beyond pharmaceuticals, although, I'm pleased to say there are continuing plans in that space. But, for example, we're currently part of a horizon scanning exercise, which is being undertaken by several SMA Europe members, each in our own countries, to identify any strands of work going on in adjacent arenas such as engineering, biotechnology, assistive technology, which might be applicable to SMA. The most promising findings then will be investigated more deeply by the American SMA Foundation for potentially significant funding. They are the organisation who really kickstarted pharmaceutical research in the US by investing millions of dollars back in the day. So that's potentially quite exciting. And in a similar vein, we were recently delighted to win significant funding for a project working with Duchenne UK to design and build a new wearable smart suit, which will give upper body strength. So basically, it will do for your arms what a wheelchair does for your legs. We expect the first prototype to take 2 years or so, and we'll be working really closely with the SMA community, asking them to get involved in the specifying, testing, trying out of the suit. So we're really leaving no stone unturned, no projects too daunting for SMA UK in seeking to build a better future for all those impacted by SMA. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Innovation is always great, and I'm really excited to see what comes ahead. Mark, if I can come back to you, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yes, well, I'd like to just thank all of our speakers for joining and making some very important contributions tonight. And everyone who's dialed in. But over the last 37 years, the charity and by extension you, our supporters, have done so much. However, as you've heard, there's still so much more to do. You've heard about our incredible outreach workers, the information we provide for our community, the work we're doing, the advocacy, the drive for access to treatments, the progress that has been made in science, our initiatives for newborn screening, standards of care and wearable suits. And also you've heard a bit about the behind the scenes work that our team does working with NICE, the NHS, SMA Europe and the pharma companies, helping to drive the dialogue and engagement on behalf of the SMA community. I want to say once again a big thank you to our amazing community and to our fantastic supporters. But as I've said, and as you've heard from Angela, there is so much more for us to do, and we're only limited by the resources that are at our disposal. Angela said that she wants to leave no stones unturned, and of course, that as a board of trustees is what we want to hear. But of course, we need to enable her or get the resources to enable her to do that. This is not a fundraiser tonight, but obviously there are ways in the future that you can support us. For example, providing non-financial resources, e.g. access to spaces or venues. But but also as well as through donations and fundraising activities. We've had supporters who've been jumping out of planes, if that's something you want to do, arrange balls. Big thank you to the team Dudley, sponsored runs, walks. The list is endless, and we're very grateful. If you're looking to update your will, leaving a legacy is something that you might want to consider. I'll leave you with some dates for the diary. We have several supporters running the London Marathon on the 2nd of October in 10 days' time.
Including you, Mark. Let's not
Yes,
forget
including me. Thank you. We have some spaces for next year's London Marathon, which will take place on the 23rd of April. So if that's something you're interested in doing, let us know. The Dudley Ball will take place on the 29th of April, and the bike ride Scorpion will be on Saturday, the 20th of May. With that, thank you for joining. There will be a follow-up email to you, and we would love to receive feedback from you. And if you have any questions, please email them in, and we'll answer them over the coming days. So good evening, and thank you.